Marcus Johnson should not have been here. But in a courtroom like this, a black teenager in the defendant's seat did not need proof. Just suspicion was enough. At the center of it all sat Judge Grayson, a man known for his ironclad demeanor and no-nonsense approach to justice. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on the defendant, a young black teenager named Marcus Johnson. The charges were serious: armed robbery and assault. The evidence, though circumstantial, seemed damning. But Marcus sat calmly, his expression unreadable, as if the weight of the accusations didn't touch him. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a perpetual frown, was laying out the case. Your Honor, the defendant was found at the scene of the crime, with stolen goods in his possession. The victim identified him in a lineup. This is an open and shut case. Marcus's public defender, a young and overworked lawyer, tried to counter. Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. There's no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his gaze narrowing as he studied Marcus. The boy's calmness was unnerving. Most defendants in his courtroom were either visibly nervous or defiant, but Marcus was different. He sat upright, his eyes steady, almost as if he were analyzing the proceedings rather than participating in them. Marcus Johnson was no ordinary teenager. At just 17 years old, he possessed an IQ of 160, placing him in the realm of genius. But Marcus had learned early on that intelligence could be a double-edged sword in his neighborhood. Growing up in a rough part of town, where survival often depended on blending in, Marcus had mastered the art of hiding his brilliance. He spoke sparingly, avoided drawing attention to himself, and kept his nose buried in books that no one else cared to read. His mother, a single parent working 2 jobs, had always encouraged him to dream big. You're special, Marcus, she would say. Don't let this place define you. But Marcus knew the reality of his situation. Being special in his world often meant being a target. So, he kept his head down, biding his time until he could escape. But now, here he was, accused of a crime he didn't commit. Marcus had been at the wrong place at the wrong time, and the system had quickly labeled him as just another statistic. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew something the judge and everyone else in the courtroom didn't. He had a plan. Judge Grayson was growing impatient. He had seen countless cases like this before, and he prided himself on being able to read people. But Marcus was an enigma. The boy's calm demeanor was starting to irk him. Young man, the judge said, his voice cutting through the silence. Do you understand the severity of the charges against you? Marcus looked up, meeting the judge's gaze. Yes, Your Honor. And yet, you sit there as if this is all some kind of game, the judge continued, his tone sharp. Let's see how well you play when the stakes are high. Marcus tilted his head slightly, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. What do you mean, Your Honor? Judge Grayson leaned forward, a sly smile playing on his lips. I propose a little game. Truth or lie. I'll ask you questions, and you'll answer. But be warned, if I catch you in a lie, it won't go well for you. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. This was highly unorthodox, but no one dared to challenge the judge. Marcus, however, remained unfazed. He nodded slowly. All right, Your Honor, I'll play. Little did the judge know, he had just stepped into a game where Marcus held all the cards. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Grayson leaned forward, his eyes locked on Marcus. The tension was palpable, and everyone seemed to hold their breath. The judge's voice was firm, almost taunting, as he asked the first question. Did you commit the crime, Marcus? Marcus didn't respond immediately. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question from every angle. The silence stretched, making the spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice calm and measured. That depends on how you define commit, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? Marcus continued, his tone steady. If by commit, you mean actively participating in the crime, then no, I did not. But if you mean being present at the scene, then yes, I was there, though not by choice. The judge's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected such a nuanced answer from a teenager. Are you playing word games with me, young man? Marcus shook his head. No, Your Honor. I'm simply being precise. Precision matters in the law, doesn't it? The judge leaned back, his expression a mix of irritation and curiosity. He hadn't anticipated this level of composure from Marcus. All right, he said slowly. Let's see how precise you can be. Marcus knew he was walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and the judge could turn against him completely. But he also knew that the truth was his greatest weapon. He had spent countless hours studying law books, memorizing case precedents, and understanding the intricacies of the legal system. Now, it was time to put that knowledge to use. When the judge asked his next question, "Why were you at the scene of the crime?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I was walking home from the library, Your Honor. I take the same route every day. That night I heard a commotion and went to see if I could help. By the time I arrived, the crime had already been committed and the police were on their way." The judge frowned. "And yet, you were found with stolen goods in your possession. How do you explain that?" Marcus took a deep breath. "The items were planted on me, Your Honor. I believe the real perpetrator saw me as an easy target, a young black kid in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's not the first time something like this has happened in our community." The judge's expression softened slightly, but he wasn't ready to let Marcus off the hook. "That's quite the accusation. Do you have any proof?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet, Your Honor, but I do have questions. Questions that might help uncover the truth." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Questions? This is my courtroom, young man. I ask the questions here." Marcus nodded respectfully. "With all due respect, Your Honor, isn't the pursuit of truth the purpose of this trial? If my questions can shed light on what really happened, wouldn't that serve justice?" The judge hesitated, then gestured for Marcus to continue. "All right, ask your questions." Marcus turned to the prosecutor. "Sir, you mentioned that the victim identified me in a lineup. Can you confirm how many people were in that lineup?" The prosecutor glanced at his notes. "There were 6 individuals, including the defendant." Marcus nodded. "And was the victim certain of their identification?" The prosecutor hesitated. "They were reasonably certain." Marcus's eyes gleamed. "Reasonably certain? Your Honor, in cases like this, eyewitness identification is often unreliable, especially under stressful conditions. Studies have shown that misidentification is a leading cause of wrongful convictions." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The jury members exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. Even the judge looked intrigued. Marcus pressed on. "Furthermore, the stolen goods found in my possession, were they tested for fingerprints?" The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "The items were not tested." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "So, there's no physical evidence linking me to the crime. Only an eyewitness identification that's reasonably certain and untested stolen goods. Does that sound like conclusive evidence to you, Your Honor?" The judge leaned back, his expression thoughtful. He hadn't expected Marcus to dismantle the prosecution's case so effectively. The courtroom was in awe. The young boy they had underestimated was now holding his own against seasoned legal professionals. The public defender, who had been silent for most of the trial, finally spoke up. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss the charges. The prosecution has failed to provide sufficient evidence to prove my client's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." The judge didn't respond immediately. He was still processing Marcus's words. The game of truth or lie had taken an unexpected turn, and Marcus was proving to be a formidable player. The courtroom was electric with tension. Marcus's calm yet incisive questioning had thrown the prosecution off balance, and even Judge Grayson was visibly impressed. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He knew this was his moment to reveal the full extent of his knowledge and turn the tide in his favor. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady but carrying a newfound weight, "I'd like to address the court directly, if I may." The judge studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Proceed." Marcus stood, his posture confident, but not arrogant. "I've been accused of a crime I didn't commit. The evidence against me is circumstantial at best, and yet, here I am, fighting for my freedom. But what if I told you that I've spent the last 3 years studying law, not just casually, but obsessively? I've read every major legal text, analyzed countless case studies, and even written my own arguments on topics like wrongful convictions and systemic bias." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor looked stunned, while the public defender's eyes widened in surprise. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Is that so?" he said, his tone a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I've done this not because I wanted to be a lawyer, but because I wanted to understand the system that so often fails people like me. And what I've learned is that the law, while imperfect, is a tool. It can be used to uphold justice, or to perpetuate injustice. Today, I'd like to use it to uncover the truth." He turned to the prosecutor. "Sir, you mentioned earlier that the victim identified me in a lineup. But did you know that the lineup was conducted improperly? The other participants didn't resemble me in age or build, which increases the likelihood of misidentification. This is a violation of standard legal procedures, as outlined in State v. Henderson." The prosecutor's face turned red. That's irrelevant. The identification was still valid. Marcus shook his head. With all due respect, it's not irrelevant. Misidentification is one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions, especially among black defendants. Studies show that cross-racial identifications are significantly less accurate. Did the victim and I share the same racial background? The prosecutor hesitated. No, they did not. Marcus turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is a critical flaw in the prosecution's case. The identification process was biased from the start, and yet it's being used as the primary evidence against me. Is that justice? Judge Grayson sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For the first time in his career, he felt a pang of doubt. He had always prided himself on being fair and impartial, but Marcus's words struck a chord. Had he been too quick to judge? Had his own biases clouded his perception? The judge's voice was quieter now, almost introspective. Marcus, you've made some compelling points, but the law requires evidence. Do you have any proof that you were framed? Marcus nodded. I do, Your Honor. While I was in custody, I asked my mother to retrieve security footage from a nearby store. The footage shows the real perpetrator running past me just moments after the crime was committed. I didn't realize it at the time, but now it's clear. I was set up. The judge's eyes widened. And where's this footage? Marcus gestured to his public defender, who quickly handed over a USB drive. It's all here, Your Honor. I've also included a timeline of events that corroborates my alibi. The judge took the USB drive, his mind racing. He had never seen a defendant, let alone a teenager, handle a case with such precision and poise. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the flaws in the system itself. As the judge reviewed the footage, Marcus took a deep breath. He knew this was his chance to humanize himself, to show the court that he was more than just a defendant. He was a person with dreams, struggles, and a story worth hearing. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice softer now. I didn't choose to be in this situation. I grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities are scarce and danger is always around the corner. My mother worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads, and I've spent my life trying to make her proud. But no matter how hard I tried, the world kept telling me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. He paused, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I hid my intelligence because I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be a target. But today, I realize that staying silent won't change anything. If I don't speak up, who will? If I don't fight for justice, who will? The courtroom was silent, the weight of Marcus's words hanging in the air. Even the judge seemed moved, his usual stern demeanor softened by the raw honesty of Marcus's speech. After a long moment, Judge Grayson spoke, his voice quieter but firm. Marcus, you've given this court a lot to consider. Your knowledge, your composure, and your willingness to confront the truth are commendable. But the law requires more than just words. It requires evidence, and you've provided that. He turned to the prosecutor. Counselor, based on the new evidence presented, I'm inclined to dismiss the charges. Do you have any objections? The prosecutor, clearly defeated, shook his head. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Very well. The charges against Marcus Johnson are dismissed. He is free to go. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and stunned silence. Marcus stood tall, a small smile playing on his lips. He had won, not just his freedom, but the respect of everyone in the room. The courtroom was on edge as Marcus prepared to present his final piece of evidence. The judge had already dismissed the charges, but Marcus wasn't done. He wanted to ensure that no one else would suffer the same injustice he had faced. He stood tall, his voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, Marcus began, while I'm grateful for the dismissal of the charges, I believe it's important to address the root cause of this miscarriage of justice. The system failed me, and it fails countless others like me every day. But it doesn't have to be this way. He held up a folder filled with documents. This contains a detailed analysis of the flaws in the investigation, including improper lineup procedures, lack of forensic testing, and systemic biases that disproportionately affect marginalized communities. I've also included a proposal for reforms that could prevent similar injustices in the future. The judge leaned forward, his interest piqued. Go on. Marcus opened the folder and began to explain. First, the lineup. As I mentioned earlier, the participants didn't resemble me in age or build, which violates standard legal procedures. This isn't just a minor oversight, it's a fundamental flaw that undermines the integrity of the entire case. He pulled out a chart showing the lineup participants. As you can see, I was the only teenager in the group. The rest were adults, some significantly older than me. This increases the likelihood of misidentification, as studies have shown that eyewitnesses are more likely to choose someone who stands out, even if they're not the actual perpetrator. The judge nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. And the forensic evidence? Marcus flipped to another page. The stolen goods found in my possession were never tested for fingerprints or DNA. This is a critical oversight, especially in a case where the defendant's guilt is in question. Without physical evidence, the prosecution's case relies solely on eyewitness testimony, which, as we've seen, is unreliable. He paused, letting his words sink in. But the most troubling aspect of this case is the systemic bias that allowed it to happen in the first place. Black defendants are disproportionately targeted, misidentified, and wrongfully convicted. This isn't just an isolated incident. It's a pattern that needs to be addressed. Judge Grayson sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on being fair and impartial. But Marcus's words struck a chord. Had he been too quick to judge? Had his own biases clouded his perception? The judge's voice was quieter now, almost introspective. Marcus, you've made some compelling points, but the law requires evidence. Do you have any proof that you were framed? Marcus nodded. I do, Your Honor. While I was in custody, I asked my mother to retrieve security footage from a nearby store. The footage shows the real perpetrator running past me just moments after the crime was committed. I didn't realize it at the time, but now it's clear. I was set up. The judge's eyes widened. And where is this footage? Marcus gestured to his public defender, who quickly handed over a USB drive. It's all here, Your Honor. I've also included a timeline of events that corroborates my alibi. The judge took the USB drive, his mind racing. He had never seen a defendant, let alone a teenager, handle a case with such precision and poise. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was exposing the flaws in the system itself. As the judge reviewed the footage, the prosecutor stood up, clearly flustered. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense is presenting new evidence without proper procedure. I move to have it dismissed. Marcus turned to the prosecutor, his expression calm but firm. With all due respect, sir, the truth shouldn't be dismissed because it's inconvenient. The footage clearly shows that I was not the perpetrator. Isn't it the duty of this court to seek the truth, no matter where it leads? The prosecutor's face turned red. This is a courtroom, not a stage for your theatrics. You're a defendant, not a lawyer. Marcus didn't back down. I may not be a lawyer, but I know the law. And I know that justice isn't served by ignoring evidence or silencing those who seek the truth. The judge raised a hand, silencing the prosecutor. Enough. Marcus has presented compelling evidence, and it's the duty of this court to consider it. Counselor, do you have any substantive objections, or are you just trying to save face? The prosecutor hesitated, then sat down, clearly defeated. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Very well. Marcus, continue. Marcus took a deep breath. Thank you, Your Honor. The footage shows the real perpetrator running past me just moments after the crime was committed. I didn't realize it at the time, but now it's clear. I was set up. He paused, letting his words sink in. But this isn't just about me. It's about the countless others who have been wrongfully convicted because of systemic flaws and biases. If we don't address these issues, more innocent people will suffer. After a long moment, Judge Grayson spoke, his voice quieter but firm. Marcus, you've given this court a lot to consider. Your knowledge, your composure, and your willingness to confront the truth are commendable. But the law requires more than just words. It requires evidence, and you've provided that. He turned to the prosecutor. Counselor, based on the new evidence presented, I'm inclined to dismiss the charges. Do you have any objections? The prosecutor, clearly defeated, shook his head. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Very well. The charges against Marcus Johnson are dismissed. He is free to go. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, like a dam breaking, the courtroom erupted. Cheers, gasps, even a few stunned tears from those who realized they had just witnessed history. Marcus stood tall, a small smile playing on his lips. He had won. Not just his freedom, but the respect of everyone in the room. The courtroom was silent, as Judge Grayson prepared to deliver his final ruling. The tension was palpable, and all eyes were on Marcus, who stood tall and composed, his expression a mix of determination and quiet hope. The judge cleared his throat, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. Marcus Johnson, he began, his tone measured but softer than before. This court has heard your arguments, reviewed the evidence, and considered the implications of this case. It is not often that a defendant, let alone one so young, demonstrates such a profound understanding of the law and the principles of justice. He paused, his gaze shifting to the prosecution. It is clear to me that the evidence against you was flawed, and the procedures followed were inadequate. The identification process was biased, the forensic evidence was overlooked, and the systemic biases at play cannot be ignored. The judge's eyes returned to Marcus, and for the first time there was a hint of humility in his expression. Marcus, today you didn't just defend yourself, you put the justice system itself on trial. And you won. You forced this courtroom to face a truth we often ignore. Justice isn't always blind. Sometimes it looks the other way. But not today. Not with you. For that, I commend you. He took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Therefore, I hereby dismiss all charges against you. You are free to go. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers, gasps, and applause. Marcus's mother, seated in the front row, burst into tears of relief, while the prosecutor sat in stunned silence. Marcus himself remained calm, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Judge Grayson raised a hand to quiet the room. But before we adjourn, I want to say something to Marcus, and to everyone here. This case has been a wake-up call for me. It has reminded me that justice is not just about following the letter of the law. It's about seeking the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Marcus, you have humbled me today, and for that, I thank you. The room fell silent once more, the weight of the judge's words sinking in. Marcus nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus's public defender approached him, a look of admiration on his face. Marcus, that was incredible. You handled yourself better than most seasoned lawyers I know. Have you ever considered pursuing a career in law? Marcus smiled, his eyes lighting up with a newfound sense of purpose. Actually, I have. This experience has shown me how much the system needs to change, and how much I can do to help make that happen. I want to become a lawyer, not just to defend the innocent, but to fight for systemic reforms that prevent injustices like this from happening in the first place. His mother, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward and pulled him into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you, Marcus. You've always been special, and now the whole world knows it. Marcus hugged her back, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done this without you. As they walked out of the courtroom together, Marcus felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. The trial had been a turning point, not just for him, but for everyone who had witnessed it. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it head-on. The sun was setting as Marcus stepped outside the courthouse, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the intensity of the trial. Reporters and onlookers had gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the young man who had taken on the system and won. Cameras flashed and questions were shouted, but Marcus remained calm, his head held high. He paused at the top of the courthouse steps, taking a moment to soak in the scene. The crowd fell silent, waiting for him to speak. Marcus looked out at them, his expression thoughtful but resolute. Today, justice was served, he began, his voice steady and clear. But this isn't just my victory. It's a victory for everyone who believes in fairness, equality, and the power of the truth. This case has shown us that the system is flawed, but it's also shown us that change is possible. We just have to be brave enough to fight for it. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. I didn't just win my freedom today. I won a fight that too many never get the chance to win. And now, I intend to make sure no one else has to fight it alone. Because justice isn't just about proving innocence. It's about making sure the innocent never have to prove it in the first place. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the streets. Marcus's mother stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, her heart bursting with pride. Even Judge Grayson, who had watched from the courthouse steps, felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. As Marcus descended the steps, the crowd parted to let him through. He walked with confidence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The road ahead was long, but he was ready. He had faced the system and emerged victorious, and now he was determined to change it for the better. The camera lingered on Marcus as he disappeared into the distance, a symbol of hope and change. The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with a sense of inspiration and a reminder that even in the face of adversity, one person can make a difference.